right. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. So, Germain, how are you? How are sales going? I know we're talking about something a little bit different today, but what's it been like the last couple of weeks for you? How are you seeing what's your pipeline look like in terms of? Did you guys see a huge impact? Was it up? Was it down? Has it rebounded?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting quarter. We, like everybody, were imagining that we would get hit pretty hard, and actually, we've seen quite a lot of resilience in our business. I think the advantage that we have is we play across different industries, and so while SaaS solutions that we're helping physical businesses and retail may be suffering, unfortunately, other solutions like e-learning have sort of taken off, and they have huge billing issues, or e-notary services, right? And so they have huge billing issues as all this demand has come through the door. So we're actually looking at, looks like we'll end up this quarter in a few days, just probably 110% of our original objective that we set out at the beginning of the year before COVID even started. So we're actually doing quite well. On the existing customer side, we do see some businesses suffering. We have a startup segment of businesses that are starting from 0 to $1 million in revenue, and we do see that they're asking for some relief, they're asking for some support, and we're being as supportive as possible for our existing customers as well, to show that as we help them navigate the turn through this period. But otherwise, yeah, no. All right now, we're firing on all cylinders, work from home and all.
Awesome. I've found the place that I need to go to turn the webinar on. So I'm just going to do that live with Chargebee. Perfect. Thanks for everybody that's just kind of hanging out here. I've got the YouTube going live. We'd promised everybody that we'd be up there, and I've been a little bit late in getting that going. So I appreciate everybody hanging out with us. I'm going to just do one last double check here. It's been interesting. We saw, I think our customers were like in a variety of different industries, and so some of them were stronger and some of them struggled. And yeah, it's been interesting to see that, like, initially there's a bit of a hit, and then things are starting to seem like they're rebounding now. Feels like people are a lot more comfortable making those calls. All right.
Are you when you're with the work that you do for the end people who you target, are you having trouble reaching them on the phone given everybody's working from home? Has that impacted at all, or we're all cell phone based anyways now?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody so I haven't heard anything like hugely noticeable on my side. We have our pods team, and we have our which are like SDRs as a service, and then we have our sort of the LinkedIn outbound side of things, where we're doing LinkedIn on behalf of our customers. And I think the LinkedIn side, we didn't really see much of a hit. I know in the first couple of weeks on the pod side with the SDRs, we definitely saw a change in habits and communication habits, and we made some accommodations for those that would be because I think like the phone was kind of tough, but I believe it's rebounded now, and I think it's just maybe a reflection of the sort of maturity of that team, but they're actually doing better than they're hitting their goals. They're doing better on their goals than they were pre-COVID. So I think we've made a lot of changes on the team. They've gotten very, very good. And it's been really exciting to see them kind of pull through over the last couple of months.
Well done to them. It's a tough job. I think there's a chat question that's just if there's a replay of this that will be available. I guess we are recording.
We are recording. There will be a replay. You should get an email from Zoom shortly afterwards.
Oh, awesome. Great.
Cool. All right. Well, with that being said, why don't we jump in? Everybody, my name's Colin Stewart. I'm the co-founder, co-CEO of Predictable Revenue, co-host of the Predictable Revenue podcast, though sometimes I pass that off to Sarah. And if you're listening to the podcast right now, we also we're doing this one live because Germain and I have done a couple of these before. We seem to you've been a customer a long time ago. We seem to run into each other at every conference we go to, but since we aren't going to any conferences in the near future, we thought we'd just hang out on Zoom and talk about what it's like running a remote sales team. You've been doing it for 4.5 years. I've been doing it for 4.5 months. So it should be a good conversation. But without that's me out of the way. Our guest today is Germain Brion. Is it VP Sales at Chargebee? And you've been building and growing quite a large team, basically 3 to 100 people in the last 4 years. So I'm really curious, like what that journey's been like. And I guess first, welcome to the webinar. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Colin. It's good to see you again. It's good to hang out. I do prefer our in-person interactions to the virtual ones, but it's good to see you here.
Yeah, the liquids we're consuming is just slightly different.
Yeah, I've got the tea over here, so yeah, we're a little more reasonable, but no, it's great to be here.
And so before we jump into, like, I know we're talking about that sort of journey from 3 to 100 people, but I'm curious. You've been remote 4.5 years. What's that like? I know you've got reps in all different territories. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the remote nature of the team. So the company was founded in India, in Chennai, and so we've always had a pretty strong office there. When I joined the business 4.5 years ago, I was the first non-Indian hire, and therefore non-based in India. So I was remote. And then as we grew the team and we market, we needed to have reps sort of in market. And the inside sales model that we have out of India is fantastic. It's a great machine, but we also needed reps sort of in India. So the remote aspect of our business is more about the way that I've been running the team. The full team hasn't been remote 100% since COVID. The challenge for me at the beginning was especially that the team runs 20 out of 24 hours, basically. There's a sort of 3 or 4 hour window in the day when we don't have coverage. But otherwise, since we're servicing APAC, we're a leader in Europe and in North America. The team's running all the time, so my inbox is constantly getting full. And I think it's been when I first joined, I wanted a weekly meeting with the team where that would fit everybody's time zone. And so I figured that since I was the odd person out, based out of California, I would do it at 4:30 in the morning, because there's a 12.5 hour time difference with India, at 4:30 in the morning Pacific time on Monday mornings. Probably one of the earliest and one of the worst decisions of my career at Chargebee, because getting up at 3:30 in the morning every Monday has a fantastic way of ruining your entire week. You start to recover basically on Thursday. So we quickly shifted that to 7:30 in the morning Pacific time, and I think that's really sort of, we've had to be accommodating. Now we just opened an office in Sydney. We have a challenge with that time zone, which is quite different. And 7:30 a.m. for us is 1:30 a.m. for Christopher, who's our director over there. And so we've always had to manage time in a certain way. And I think everybody has to be a little bit flexible. It's always a little early or a little late for somebody is the reality. And that's just part of joining a global business, I think, in the way that we are. And then currently we have it set up, but we'll talk a little bit about how we got here. When we were 3 people, it was obviously the kind of the full stack AE. Now when we're 100 people, we really have a sort of assembly line model that goes from what we call the LDRs, so lead development reps, not very common in North American businesses because of the cost structure of labor. But in India, we're able to actually have, in addition to a Clearbit or a HubSpot, firmographic enrichment, we're able to have a human being actually look at every lead that comes in, look at their LinkedIn, look at what they've been posting, look at their website, and give the SDR a lot more context for their initial call to qualify, and then for the SDR to hand off qualified SQLs over to account executives to manage deal cycles with solutions consultants or sales engineers.
It stressing me out just hearing about you being live 24 hours or 20 out of 24 hours. That's wild, man. So talk to me about the journey, like, because it not only have you done this, like you played this game on hard. This was not it's not an easy thing to do, especially being remote, being the first hire to an Indian company you're based in California. So talk to me about, like, what did it look like at the beginning, and sort of what has been your role in scaling up this beast?
Yeah, I mean, it's the very beginning. The first story is that I had shut down a couple startups in France and came to San Francisco to see if I wanted to move here. And I got into an Uber pool leaving TechCrunch Disrupt. and the other passenger was Krish, who is the CEO and one of the co-founders of Chargebee. So I got my job in an Uber, which is pretty, yeah, I still pinch myself now when I look back 4.5 years. And to be frank, I didn't know what SaaS meant when I joined the business. I had never really done, I did more B2C sort of apps before. It was a whole new world for me. And Krish and the founders trusted me to scale this out. And we quickly had to figure out, what an MQL is, what an SQL is, and what all these things are. And actually, predictable revenue, Aaron and Jason's book helped a lot. That was my Bible the first 6 months. Yeah, I think that then it was, as a product at that time, we were much more in a transactional sales model. We were almost, we were basically selling on price. We were the cheapest or the most affordable solution on the market. And that has a fantastic way of sort of limiting your potential customer base, because larger customers don't want the cheapest solution. They want the best value for money, but they want a reliable solution, a scalable solution. They don't, price is a factor, but it's not the determining factor for something like billing, which is such a core piece of infrastructure for a business. So we had to quickly reposition and retrain our sales team. And I think at the time, our 3 salespeople were really, they more or less all came out of support functions. So they were glorified support people. And we had to get into, what is a demo, and, how do we do that discovery? That was the thing. That was the first year, was a lot of that, and tightening up. The business was at less than $1 million ARR at that time. And really we had, there was obviously a market, but we were trying to be everything to everyone. And so we really had to dial in who's our ICP. So B2B SaaS is our primary, target. And then align that with product and marketing, because we have a very strong inbound engine. And so we had to align with our marketing so that they would bring us leads that we actually wanted to sell to or could sell to.
Very interesting. And so, man, it's such a journey to go from we're the low cost provider to, to going up market. It's not just a product or sales motion. It's the sort of entire company motion, even though it seems like, we'll just sell for a different reason. Like, you're building products and features and you're building things for different reasons. I guess probably not the focus of this sort of our conversation today. But I'm curious on if I can zoom into the journey of 3 to 100. What were the first 3, and then what did that look like for and how you decided to scale out that team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. The first 3 were salespeople and full stack salespeople, and I think that it was important to train them on sales motions and on selling on value and not selling on price. And that was actually none of those 3 people are still with the business today. That's been
you hatchet man.
the reality. But so we had to rebuild that team with people who were more salesy people. Then we quickly realized that the work that they were doing, from the lead coming in all the way to the deal cycle for a relatively complex sale, where we wanted to go, we multiplied that ASP within the first, I think, 18 months by 10. We wanted to go to a more consultative sales motion rather than a transactional sales motion. And that means that their bandwidth actually for new leads decreases. And so at that point, it's about, all right, how can we generate, how can we save their bandwidth for the sales cycle and free them up elsewhere? And there are 2 things that we immediately identified. One of them is the technical aspect of things, where it's a technical product. We support so many use cases, so many different types of businesses and currencies and billing options, that it is very hard for a person to be excellent at sales and to have excellent technical capabilities to be able to do it. So we started a pre-sales team, or a sales engineering team, pretty quickly, so that they would be doing the demo. The second piece was, what is happening before a lead, before we get to an SQL, right? And what's that qualification process? And is there really value add for the account executives to be speaking to people and qualifying them? well, we know the answer. As you build out scale, you think, well, no, actually there's an SDR function that can do inbound lead qualification. We can set them up. It's a great talent pipeline for our account executives later, but we can set them up with a very clear qualification criteria and get them to tee up these the calls for the AEs. So the AEs focus on what they do best, which is selling. So I think that the summary, the TLDR of the 3 to 100 is specialization, right? It's just we go from this very generalist model to this increasingly specialized sales model. And now, even within the account executives, we're segmented into 3 different market segments. And I anticipate that in 2021, we'll actually start to verticalize so that it's, somebody's doing media, somebody's doing e-commerce, et cetera.
Gotcha. No, like obviously these are big chunks. And so it's interesting that you kind of started with full stack and then you eventually like worked on the specialization. Was it just that you read the book late, or just at the beginning it didn't really make sense because there were so few people on the team?
Yeah, I think at the beginning there were so many, so I believe in one of the principles with which we've done this. We grow the business over 100% year on year, which is great. The interesting piece is that we do it through what I believe is incrementalism. So we do it through these kind of little piece lifts that actually move the needle rather than kind of giant shifts. And that allows us to coordinate across different teams. So there would have been no sense in us, just putting butts in seats if product wasn't ready and marketing wasn't ready, right? So, and if our salespeople weren't actually trained as great salespeople, it didn't make sense either, right? If you want to specialize the team, you need specialists on that team. So I think it was just about how do we navigate and always push to the limit what the organization can sustain in terms of change, and the sort of the ambition or the vision of getting further down the line of this, like they say in the book, this like fully segmented and specialized team.
Beautiful. So I'm curious, and I love the idea of the incrementalism and starting small. What was that first change that you made when you're trying to unpack things from, I've got sales reps that are full stack and they're doing everything, to what do we do next? How did you make that decision? And I guess what was the first thing that bit the dust?
The first thing that I really did, and that that caused some friction, was I changed the comp plan. I think that the first thing you should look at that is, what is your comp plan, and are you aligning the comp plan to the behavior that you want to drive, right? Like behavior follows comp all the time. And the challenge was that when I came in, they were all incentivized on a team goal, and they were systematically paid out 100%. So there was no real incentive to perform, and they were on a 70-30 split. So the first thing we did was that. The immediate next thing we did was we changed the demo deck. If you want people to shift from a transactional model to a consultative model, we inserted a new step in the process that was, all right, now we're going to do a discovery call, which doesn't demo the product. We're not showing product on the first call. We're actually going to learn more about the client so that on the second call, we can actually speak to their needs and not just do this kind of general blow through of this complex product. So that's how we got the needle moving.
Gotcha. And so what do you think was the biggest change that you made initially?
The biggest impact change probably came a little bit down the line. It was probably after, I guess, about first year of being in the business when we went from that kind of full stack AE to bringing in an SDR team, right? And I think that starting to qualify leads and kind of split up the funnel between functions was probably the most impactful change on our ability to accelerate growth and to go up market, right? Because at that point, reps have bandwidth. So there is a point where reps can have too many leads or too many deals, right? And when you free that bandwidth, they're able to focus on more deals, so therefore more complicated deals, which have higher sales values, and therefore you start closing a little bit bigger book of business.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I'm curious, what did that, because I totally agree. If we're thinking about making that move from a full stack sales rep to somebody who's, I don't know, like just prospecting and somebody who's just closing, the getting that prospecting element off my desk, off my lap is huge. Right? Like it's a significant part of my day that I'm not necessarily very good at, especially if I'm only spending 10% of my day, 20% of my day, if that for most reps. So I'm curious. That must have been a bit of a bumpy journey. Like I know we worked together in that early period. Talk to me about like what that looked like, what your journey looked like, and trying to, because I know you have SDRs now, but like what was the progression there? How did you get there?
It's still a work in progress actually, because we were fortunate enough to have a very strong inbound engine from the beginning that's carried us quite a bit. So what we call an SDR does inbound lead qualification. We're not actually prospecting. And one of the challenges, and this was one of the problems that I came to you with years ago, is, we're not generating our own pipeline. We're not victims, but we're dependent on marketing for the pipeline. And so let's see if we can build up this engine to generate pipeline. And it's something that, to be honest, has been one of the things that I have not been incredibly successful at in the past 4.5 years is generating that engine on outbound. We know that one of our primary competitors built a $300 million plus business entirely on prospecting. So it's not a market or a category thing, it's an us thing. And finally, in January this year, we rolled out a new plan for outbound where we were going to hire a whole new set of reps, because one of the challenges with what you were talking about, Colin, is not only is it hard for a rep in normal circumstances to start prospecting and generating their pipeline, for a rep who is used to having leads fall from the sky, it is nearly impossible to get them to actually, and so we would bring in these reps who had done it before, but we'd put them on the inbound funnel and then we'd almost spoil them, right? At some point, they're just like, oh, this comes from the sky. Why am I going to go through these motions? So right now we're hiring a team and we can talk about that a little bit later, but a team's focused primarily on driving their own pipeline. And in parallel, we're creating for them, because your point is absolutely correct, that even 10 to 20% for a rep, prospecting is a lot, and a lot of not necessarily their best use of time to go well beyond that. We're creating what we call a BDR team, and the BDR team is going to be doing outbound pipeline generation, right? So they're going to be hammering the phones and doing all that. And so really, I think where I missed this before was trying to square the circle in getting everything out of the same team. And rather than making the engine bigger, we've decided to build a second engine beside it. So we'll have, and that seems to be an easier shift.
Follow you there. I like the fact that you're focusing, like you started with specialization and now you're sort of specializing and segmenting even a little bit further, which sounds like the differentiating between inbound and outbound for your sales development reps or business development reps. I've seen a number of companies where let's put ourselves into that SDR seat. You have a group of customers that are sitting in your inbox, or a group of prospects that are sitting in your inbox. They're saying, hey, I got a problem. Can you help me with this? Hey. And all you have to do is ask them some questions and see if they're a good fit or not. And I don't mean to take anything away from any of the inbound reps that might be listening. Like it's definitely not an easy job, but when you compare that motion to sitting there staring at your sequencing tool and you've got a bunch of cold prospects that are not replying, and you're like, is anybody alive in here? It's very, very different. And so what I found is that when we have mixed the roles, every human is naturally going to gravitate towards, hey, people are over on this side asking me questions. This feels like a better use of my time. And I think that's totally natural. But then what happens is those cold prospects, they get left out in the cold, and they're cold and lonely. Nobody's taking care of them.
Exactly. No, I think that's 100% correct. And I think, being an outbound development rep, whether you call them BDRs or SDRs, but being an outbound cold calling, I think is the hardest job in sales. So it's one of the, junior starting positions. And I think that I have a ton of respect for the people who do that, because getting that much rejection in a day is challenging for anybody's ego, no matter how sort of confident you can be on things. The sort of asking people, salespeople are the quintessential optimizers, right? They go for, it's not that we're lazy, but we go for the path of least resistance quite naturally because everything else we do is so hard. And so to your point, yeah, if I have to choose between here's your lead queue or here's your sequence of calls, I'm going to pick the lead queue every time. It's natural. But as a business, we can't just rely on inbound, right? We need inbound, we need outbound. There are tons of people out there who are experiencing challenges to their growth, bottlenecks to their possibility to iterate on pricing, internationalization, new product launches, where their homegrown solution, which is often the case for billing, is limiting their growth. And so, but they may not have the awareness over the fact that better solutions exist and better options exist. So if we can go out and educate them and inform them, then obviously we're generating pipeline for us, but we're for ourselves, but we're also helping out these businesses, which is one of my favorite things. And one of the things that keeps me in this job is the number of businesses that we see scale, right? And when I look at how they go from zero to, one of our top 3 clients, we signed this deal at the end of 2017, was at 0 at the end of 2017 and is now one of our top 3 clients. They're, in hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. It's just phenomenal to see that.
That's pretty special to see.
Yeah.
And you're totally right about the journey and the education part. I believe I've had conversation with one of your competitors, and they might have ended up in a newer revision of Impossible to Inevitable. I think Aaron's friends with their CEO, or like they both worked at Salesforce back in the day. And they talked about their sort of T-shaped model where it's education, education, education. They're doing something homegrown, or they might not even have a subscription billing service or model in their business. And then all of a sudden something clicks, and then they sort of drop down the funnel, and they call it their T-shaped model. Because it's education, education, education. And it's a ton of like SDRs not seeing any progress. And then all of a sudden a deal just closes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can, so that's the other thing that we have to get used to is our sales cycles when it's inbound, right? So as a category, what's great, and this is something that everybody can think about, is if you think about yourself as a category where people will naturally compare products, right? And billing is a space where you're committing to 3 to 5 years probably, because you don't want to go through this every year for sure. And so it's kind of like a CRM in terms of how important and how locked in you become. And so you're going to evaluate different people. And that's one of our advantages that let us grow on inbound, is when you're talking to if our competitors have reached out to you and done the education, when they're ready to drop, they're going to talk to a couple different people and they're there to compete with them. But it's still better to be the first person and the person educating, right? But it means a longer sales cycle. It means waiting longer. It means different types of comp plans. It means setting up expectations with the board and with the executive leadership of the business that this new engine is going to pay off, but it's going to there's a lead time to it that's going to be longer because we're educating. So I think, the competitor you're referring to have done a huge amount of work in evangelizing the market. They've probably put the category on the map because of how much they spend on marketing and education. And that's great. We're thankful to them and very happy for them to continue to do that. But now we're gonna join the education part.
Beautiful. I think I like how you phrase it, is that it's a decision of when you want to inject yourself into the buyer's journey, right? Do you want to get in at the education phase, or do you want to wait until they've talked to one of your competitors? And both are valid strategies, but the inbound strategy, it's not a guarantee that they'll have talked to your competitor, but if they're searching for you, there's a good chance that they're going to see your competitors. It's less likely that they're going to go and do some Googling and only find Chargebee.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's absolutely true.
Gotcha.
But it's like everybody knows how RFPs go, and especially if you get into bigger businesses, if you're the first one there and you're the one doing the education, then you have the pen basically on the RFP. And that creates a huge advantage.
Oh, I had a bad experience at a previous company. I don't want to talk about RFPs.
Sorry. Well, yeah.
I can see my folder system of just failure sitting next to my desk. It was atrocious, going up against some very, very large companies as a very small company.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a bad experience.
I imagine. I mean, RFPs are a necessary part of doing business. I'm not a huge fan, and I've never in this business or in previous businesses haven't seen a huge amount of success in that in general. And if you're a younger sort of startup and you are listening to us, I think that think about the time and the cost benefit analysis of that RFP, because they're going to have you fill out all this stuff. You're going to go through their whole process, right? Sometimes it's necessary depending on what segment you play in, but if you can avoid it when you're starting out, it's not the fastest way to revenue. And that predictable part of predictable revenue is, at least in my experience so far, a little lacking in the RFP area.
Yeah. Anything that's going to turn into a popularity contest at the end of the day is just not something that I want to participate in. And I've sort of, as a salesperson, I generally like to stay away from anything with the RFP in it or anything like that. It's not my style. It's not my favorite. I know there's some people that excel at it. It's just me personally, not a fan. So I'm curious, I want to pivot the conversation a little bit and talk about how you run that team, because we've gone from, having a conversation with 3 people that are probably all in the same office to 100 people that are fully distributed now across, you've got 20 hours of time zone coverage. Like, what does communication look like across that group?
And obviously as you're kind of building the plane as you fly it, right? And so when I look at where 100 people now, I think at the beginning of 2019 we were probably 40 people, and that sort of more than doubling, and we're going to probably be 120 by the end of the year. That pace means that it's not just communication in day to day, it's also your systems and your processes have to change, right? In real time. So one note I talked about incrementalism. The other note that I'll note is that my kind of view on this is that done is much better than perfect, right? And so we really need to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think that's the way it runs. But just actually get something done. 80% done is great. When you're growing quickly, by the time you get it done, you're going to have to change it anyways. So that's the first piece. On the communication piece, more specifically, what we've had to do is we've built in layers of, now we have a regional head. So we have a VP of North America, Josie, who joined us recently. We have a director in the EU, Tarmo, who's great, came from one of our competitors, huge industry knowledge. And we've got Christopher in Australia, and then CJ in India. And that lets us kind of disseminate information down to the team. The main thing for me that I've used in the 4 years, if I go back to before I had this awesome support team helping me, is about how are you clear in your communication, right? How do you make sure your message is as short and as impactful as possible? And there's a sense in which working with a team in India from California can be a secret weapon, right? Or a superpower, because if you write the email to an ops team and ask them to do something while you're sleeping, they're working. And so if you've been clear, you've actually made a huge amount of progress overnight. Mm-hmm. The pitfall is that it can be your sort of kryptonite if you missed, if you missed something about the scope and they come back with a question, then you lose a night and you've got to actually lose a whole day, because you can answer them in the morning, but they won't get it until the following day. And so it kind of cuts both ways. And this has forced me to work on being extremely concise and clear in communication. That comes to the second part, and this is the founders in Chargebee have a number of beliefs, but one of them is that writing is thinking. And so it's this being able to write well and have sort of these clear instructions again. And that is one of the things we struggled with that more recently, is the number of platforms, right? Hangouts, Slack, email, where we, and I get pinged on WhatsApp, and then where are we doing this? But now the team has kind of this escalation system where, general information is email, daily information is kind of Slack, urgent information is WhatsApp. We've given up Hangouts. Sorry, Google. I know you've tried. these things multiple times, but it's just not working out for you. But yeah, and so I think that's the team you have to drive a culture of communication across the team that is shared through the tools, so that everybody knows how we interact, and that often relates to time, because you're dealing with different time zones. On the other pieces of community, like the other thing that the founders believe in that I want to mention is that, our purpose as leaders. So first of all, we work for the team, right? The team doesn't work for us. And so we're successful when our teams are successful. It's impossible for me to succeed without the team. So my job is to enable them as much as possible. And part of that involves, and this is a challenge we had this year with the scale of the team, pushing the decision as close to the front lines as possible, so that my bandwidth doesn't become a bottleneck for the team being able to move forward. And so really empowering different leads with very clear protocols. And one of the things that we did that we always vaguely had, but we formalized values, and then we formalized OKRs, and we're kind of late to the game on both of those, given the maturity of our organization. But that's been a hugely impactful way. A hugely impactful way of scaling from a tribe to a community or to a collective. And I think that gives everybody a framework for thinking and decision making that lets them be more autonomous, so that there's no dependency on reaching the right person who's in another time zone or who doesn't have the bandwidth. So I think those are kind of all the high level communication pieces. More recently, we put in kind of agile meetings every week. We'll talk about that maybe a little later. We can talk about EOS. Colin, I know you're a fan. You've put this in place, and I think we're just getting started. But it's been hugely beneficial to just have these quick meetings where we're very clear on what the priorities are, and we cut out the noise and just focus on these rocks of things that the team needs to move.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add that I'm a big fan of EOS, and I think the piece here, and I know this is a sales podcast, but I agree with you on pushing the decisions lower down. And I think how this fits into the conversation is that as you're growing and you're scaling the organization, if you want to be that leader that scales, you need to let go of things. And I think that there's a couple pieces for me that I've struggled with, and one is just is getting the confidence in the individual that I'm handing it to, and then not sitting there and going, "Oh, I wouldn't do it that way. Oh, I wouldn't do it that way." And I think some of the mistakes that I made in the early days, and my team's probably listening, they're going, "You asshole, you're still making these mistakes." Is just like not being super clear about my expectations. And I think a lot of that came down to the lackadaisical approach to training and onboarding and documenting the process. Because I'd hand something off, and then you're like, "Oh, I wouldn't do it that way. I wouldn't do it this way." Well, what I've changed, and what EOS, kind of instilled upon us, was the idea of core processes, and that, hey, if something's important, then you need to make sure you document it, and you need to have a standardized way of doing that. And I think this was a big piece for me in handing off responsibilities. Like, I started off as our only account executive, and then I passed the AE role off to Kay, and who is amazing. And then I passed off the sales management role a couple of years later to Julian, and arguably way too late. And now I've kind of stepped away from the sales side of things. But along the way, like, there was multiple missteps. And I think one of the biggest pieces was just not documenting those core processes.
I totally agree. It's clear in your head. It's obvious to you. And you're just like, why, all right, I know I have to delegate, so I will take it upon myself to delegate. Okay, I delegate, but no, wait, they're not doing it right. So I'm going to take it back. I'm going to do it. And the problem is that you become, like, your bandwidth, your mind share, your ability becomes the bottleneck to your growth. And that's a really sort of, I found when I had, it's a cold shower when I had that realization. It's hard with process and documentation when you have something that's changing very quickly. But at the same time, if you don't start documenting that early and then start empowering the team to themselves make changes to process, right, then it's always going to be sort of dependent on you. you can't get that global scale, and you can't get to those revenue numbers if it just depends, if you're the dependency. And plus, also, if you're thinking about the risk to the business, what a risk for the business.
Totally. We've got, this has just been a trend. I am butchering people's names. I'm going to say Jamaica. And let me know if in the comments or in the chat here, if I got that right, and just relentlessly brutalize me if I got it wrong. But they're asking, are there any apps that you can recommend to help with the documentation process? For me, it's my calendar. It's putting a block into my calendar to make sure that I have the time. Because in my opinion, there might be good places to track it, but I just do all this in Google Docs. And to me, it's just a simple exercise of, one, making sure I actually book the time to do it. Two, making sure I actually use that time to do this thing. And then three, open the fucking Google Doc and just write down the steps. And then once you're done with the Google Doc, it's not just about putting it in the doc and then sending it off and saying, hey, I got a core process for this. It's write the doc, walk through the individual through, and then make sure they fully understand and have a way of reinforcing the points that are in the core process. I mean, Germain, what are your thoughts? Do you have a favorite tool? Do you have a?
I think Google Docs is the best way to go, especially when you're sort of especially when you're, let's call it the sub 1 to, I think, 20 million plus. You can run out of Google Docs for so many things, because the thing is that they're collaborative. There's tons of form factors you can put into it. They're, always, you don't have to worry about versioning. You always have the latest version. I just think it's, again, in this idea of don't overthink or don't go for the perfect. If you need to do a sales playbook, get in Google Slides, run it in Google Slides. It'll be fine, right? It won't be the most designed, latest. That doesn't matter. It's going to change so much, but at least you'll have it down. So I completely agree with you, Colin, on that. And on the calendar, I think calendar is one of the things that I've started to do this year, and it's a little too late, I think, on that as well, is to block off time to work on process or to think on strategy, or because otherwise it was all the meetings and then an open calendar. People would then schedule more meetings, and ultimately you're chasing it. You need think time, you need sort of process time, you need strategy time, and that has the same value as a team meeting or a customer meeting in your development of the business. So why wouldn't it get its own slot on your calendar to make sure that you're actually, that time doesn't get eaten up? And on the process more generally, you're saying, Colin, absolutely, just bite the bullet, sit down and write it. Often when I've had to do this, because I don't like to take the time to do it, is I usually, in a time when we could travel, I would sort of go away for a weekend, or for, even midweek, I would go away for 3 days in an Airbnb somewhere else just to change my scene. I would have no meetings scheduled, and my only task would be write out the playbook, right? Because it had been something that I'd been punting for so long. That's how we got to a V1. It was a terrible V1, but if it's like product, right? If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your playbook, then you waited too long.
I totally agree. And I used to have those times away to think. And I just, especially with in the last couple of months being remote, I find it's just disappearing. And I just got this implemented for myself a couple of weeks ago and for my whole team. So I feel like I kind of want to show and tell. It's going to be the least interesting show and tell you've ever seen. I promise you that. And I'm not even sure how it's going to work on YouTube. Yeah, I don't think it's working at all. I apologize, YouTube. But if you're in Zoom, you can see, this is my calendar, and you can see Tuesdays, Super Tuesdays, no external meetings day.
Oh, nice.
And so it happened because of COVID. My in-laws watch the kids once a week. We have childcare for the rest. And when COVID hit, all of the, they're in their 70s. And so they didn't want to be taking on a couple of little germ monsters, which is totally understandable. And so my job was flexible. And so I was able to step in, fortunately, and be home. And my wife and I were able to be home on Tuesdays. And then I just lied to the team. I didn't tell them when I didn't, that I've given the kids back. I mean, I've confessed to the senior team, but I haven't told anybody else in the company, and I still have it blocked in my calendar. Though now I'm realizing that the marketing team now knows. But I'm still not. I'm still not replying to Slack messages on Tuesdays. I'm still not taking any meetings, and I'm going to be vigilant about that, because for the last 3 weeks, it's been the most productive weeks of my last year, hands down.
I think that's awesome, and I think Colin, on the point on sort of telling the team, when I revamped my calendar and I put in think time and I put in GSD, get shit done time, and there are kind of 3 blocks, and the other one is feed the animals, which is these kind of requests that people have put in that you don't really want to do but you have to do. And so I have those 3 blocks, and I let the team know that I was putting in think time and even reading time, just so that, because I want to encourage them to do the same thing, right? I think that it's important that the team have this time to focus. And I do think there's, COVID has brought in this idea of where we have a very hard time splitting between work and personal, which is a real challenge in our personal lives. And as well, within work, it seems like we're just, everybody's kind of always online. So there's always some Slack conversation going on. And at some point you need to shut it off. I also have friends who have started doing now digital detox Saturdays, where every Saturday, no phone, no screens, and you just gotta, I guess, learn to read regular books and paint. But I think these are all necessary adaptations to our current environment.
Nice. I like that. I've tried to do something similar in my mornings, and it was I fell out of the habit when COVID hit. But I've recently, this week, I've been rebuilding that habit. And I basically, I've kept my phone. My phone doesn't sleep next to my bed anymore. I don't use my phone as my alarm clock, because I found that, in my opinion, was the killer app that smartphones had, that was such a sleeper, that pun not intended there, a sleeper app that nobody realized, that if you're using your phone as your alarm, that it's next to your bed. And if your phone's next to your bed before you go to bed, I might as well just check the notifications. And when you wake up, I'm just going to grab my phone. And so now I don't sleep next to my phone. It was in the other room. Now I've got it charging next to my desk. And then I have a rule that until I go through my morning routine with the boys, and then my personal morning routine with myself, and I don't touch my phone until it's work time. That means I don't check email. I don't look at I read, The Economist Espresso in the morning. And I don't touch any of that until I'm standing here where I am right now. And sometimes I cave on that, but it means I'm reading, I'll take I've got books in certain locations that I visit in the morning, and I read a book instead of, playing with my phone. And I found that is really, really helpful. Now, I know we didn't promise that we were going to talk about bathroom habits on the podcast here. And so we get 10 minutes left of Germain's time, and I want to make sure I kind of wrap this up into something that's valuable. I see Marianne's asking just a question on sort of remote or face-to-face. Germain, what's your preference?
Well, I mean, my reality is remote, right? I've been living in Zoom for the past 4.5 years, and it's I can understand face-to-face, and having colleagues right next door is great. It's also it's great for personal reasons. It's great for just that sense of community. It also creates a lot of room for interruptions, because people always come up, hey, can I ask you a quick question? Hey, can I ask you? And when you do remote, there are no quick questions. Now, maybe at a human level, that's not as great. At a productivity level, I kind of enjoy that, because if you have a question, it's going to be structured. It's going to be on Slack. The way that we found to try to build a little bit more relationship being remote is that we have I think it's 2, maybe it's 3 now, 3 weekly blocks that are optional by region for anybody who works in that time zone to join. And either it's a trivia day, or it's we call it Charge Bar on Fridays, which is like our happy hour, right? Or on Mondays we'll do it. And I think it's important to try to cultivate space for non-work exchange with coworkers to help being able to relate to them and being able to build ties. The other thing that I've done as a leader that I found helpful is started to do 2 skip levels every week. So on my calendar, there are now 2 skip levels for each of those people in the 100 member team, which means that every year I'll have, right now cycled through, if the team stayed at this current size, I'll have cycled through everybody in a year, which is a long time. the team knows they can reach out to me in the interim if they have other things and want to talk about. But I found those skip levels to cultivate a little bit of space where we're not just talking about work. We're not just talking about what's your next task, what's your pipeline, what's your deals. We're primarily trying to avoid those things and actually talk about, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How are things at home? What's going on? Oh, what book did you read, et cetera? And I think that, leaders and managers need to be aware of some of the things that are being echoed in this challenge of being, remote now, and go the extra mile for the teams to create a little bit more relationship.
Totally. Well laid out there. To come to Marianne's question, to answer it myself, do I prefer remote or in person? I think if you asked me that 3 months ago, I would have said in person for sure. Now with COVID, I think just we've pushed the whole company remote, and we're going to stay remote. And I think it's forced us to do the effort of to go through the effort of creating all these core processes and documenting things. And I think it's made us a better company. And so in terms of, do I think we're better now that we're remote? 100%. Now, is there a benefit to being in person? And am I looking forward to seeing other humans face to face? And is there an element of that I'll incorporate into the remote culture once it's, safe to do so? 100%. I'm in Vancouver, and so the cases here have been fairly steady, we're advancing in our progression we got different stages, and things are looking fairly positive. We only had, I think, 1 or 2 new deaths in the last couple of days, which has been really encouraging. And so we're having our first senior team beers hangout, where we're going to go and we'll be outside in a park, and there'll be 4 or 5 of us, or 6, 5 of us, and we'll sit 6 feet apart or whatever it is, and hang out. So I'm very much looking forward to being able to do things like that on a regular basis and see the rest of the team. But in terms of do I have a favorite? I think mixed, is the real answer.
Yeah, I think that I can understand that as well. But it is important. I get so energized when the team's together, right? You go to you do an SKO.
Yeah. So Jess has got an idea here that some reps that are good in person are not good at remote sales, and either requires sort of retooling or getting reps into the relevant skills. Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see that. Our sales team, and Germain, I'll let you jump in here, but our sales team was all remote and digital first in the first place. We're not flying to anybody's offices. What are you guys doing?
Yeah, ours is relatively similar. Every now and then, for bigger deals, we try to get one in-person meeting within the cycle. But typically, our motion is like yours, Colin, kind of remote. And I think in 2020, as a salesperson, if you're really good in person, you should really focus on how do you skill up virtually. Because while I believe that handshakes will come back, and I believe that these things will always be important for certain deals, I think that the way that the market has become so accustomed to seeing everybody's living room, everybody's, kids running into Zooms like that, the way we've changed our relationship to clients and prospects means that these types of meetings on Zoom, even after things normalize, will probably continue to some extent more than before. And so as a salesperson, you really need to tool up on being able to sell this way, I think.
Totally agree. And I think if I ever have to go back into the office, I'm gonna have to wear pants on a regular basis, not sweatpants or shorts. I can't imagine what the shift is for the individuals that are used to wearing suits and ties and are now sitting there in their bedroom in a suit and tie. Are you on a suit and tie? Are you wearing a suit and tie? Are you or are you just sitting there in a t-shirt?
I totally agree. And I'm here barefoot. I think it's such a comfort to be able to do that.
Slippers.
Yeah.
Totally. We got 4 minutes left, so I just want to throw it to questions to anybody that's hanging out live. And if you're on the podcast, sorry, you're obviously not live, so I can't answer your questions. But if you are on the podcast, jump into YouTube and hit subscribe, obviously, because it's a good thing to do. You don't want to miss any of the videos. But if you do have a question, throw it in YouTube and I'll in a YouTube comment, and I will do my best to answer you. And if you got a question for Germain, we'll help make sure that we facilitate that. So if you got questions and you are live either on YouTube or in Zoom, now's your chance to throw it in the Q&A button. And Germain, I guess you're not going back into the office ever, because you didn't have an office to go back to in the first place.
Yeah, we had, so in San Francisco, we had a WeWork for, I don't know, the past year. Basically, we had a WeWork because there were a couple people coming in. And I do think, so one of the things we lose and that we have to figure out, I don't have a great answer, is that when you get salespeople in a room together, will hear from each other and learn from each other, and you get like a percolation of information that you that doesn't happen obviously remote, because everything is so silent. And that's something that I think, if your request for startup, find a way to get us to, ambient noise of other people's calls. That's not so that you overhear key points without distracting you while you're working. Something like that would be great. So we had the WeWork for that. We've shut it down now. And I think that we're just going to be in a culture until, I think we'll likely reopen the office in Chennai in 2021. But I think we'll be in a culture elsewhere where it's just, work from home as often as you want. And then sometimes if you want to go into an office, we'll try to have some spaces, or at least, like you were saying, Colin, I think the beers is a great idea. Like, you need to create space and opportunity for teams to get together physically and be really conscious about that.
Yeah. If you were looking at the, I know there've been a couple of tools that push people that create a chat background. I know Discord is one popular one that is used by gamers pretty frequently. That if you did want to do that, you could try leaving your Discord on, or leave your Zoom on in the background and nuke your video. I've experimented with ideas like that. Jess has got an ambient noise app. That sounds awesome. Albert's asking, we can't train our SDRs with shadowing techniques. Any advice? I totally agree. It's shadowing is super helpful. There are two tools. There's three tools that you can use that all do something similar. But Gong, Chorus, and Exec Vision. And
I'll add a fourth one. Try Wingman.
Wingman, okay.
They do. It's like Gong and Chorus, startup out of India that does a similar thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, really all you need is something that's going to record your calls. You could even use Zoom if they're all on Zoom. You just have them hit the record button on all of them, and you can set it to automatically record all the calls in Zoom and then delete them a month later. And we do that. We do call scoring. We do a call scoring session once a week and a call review session once a week, so that you still get a little bit of that. Deeper conversation, and we're kind of at the noon mark. But Germain, last question: what do you guys do for the call SDR call shadowing?
Yeah, it's mainly we use Wingman, and that's it's same, like call recordings sent through. We create a repository. Actually, we don't even delete them. We create by sort of theme. We have a repository where we keep them for the best calls or the worst calls. That way, when we're onboarding new people, we can have them listen to that. I don't know how that works in the age of GDPR, but there's no PII really in a call. That's a similar, and then we just do training with regular mock calls. We also have regular cadence of mock calls, but it is a struggle. I still think that when you sit in a room, and I would, when I would sit in the WeWork and have reps talking, and you hear them say something and they hang up, and you say, oh, well, at that point in your call, you could have said this. The ability to do that is still there with Wingman, Gong, Chorus for sure, but it requires me to actually go out and actively seek out a call, listen to a specific call, rather than just sitting there and almost serendipitously being able to chime in and give a coaching moment.
Right on. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have for right now. So Germain, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks everybody that joined in. And if you're on the podcast, thanks for joining in, and we will see you or hear from you next week.
Thank you, Colin. Nice seeing you again. Thanks to your team.
Good to see you too, buddy. And I hope your family is safe and healthy, and same with your team. I know it's different countries around the world are having different responses, and I just hope everybody on your team and your family is safe and healthy.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Colin. You too.
Right on. Thanks.
Bye bye.